We are now live on HHTV. You may begin.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome to our forum on the future of downtown Seattle. This, of course, is a topic that we all have a strong vested interest in how the safety and the evolution of downtown Seattle works for our residents here at Horizon House. You know, we all rely on the arts, the entertainment, the restaurants, being able to be physically out in downtown Seattle, so the safety matters a lot to us. And what better person to have help us talk about downtown Seattle than Jon Scholes, the president and CEO of the Downtown Seattle Association. And he is an ally in our process to encourage our city council and our mayor to take action to improve the safety and security of downtown Seattle. So we're glad to have Jon with us. The Downtown Seattle Association was started in 1958 and has 2,100 members with the intent of improving and creating a healthy and vibrant downtown Seattle. And Jon also is responsible for the management of the Business Improvement District that was established in 1999 to provide cleaning, safety, and transportation, marketing, and in the public areas of downtown Seattle. And Jon is a downtown resident himself, so he knows all about what that means to have a safe, secure environment. And he's spent more than 20 years in nonprofit advocacy and local government. And we are just really pleased to have you here, Jon, to tell us a little bit of your perspective about downtown Seattle and help us understand what we can do to pitch in, to chime in, to encourage our council and our mayor to take action to improve downtown Seattle. So take it away, Jon.
Well, thanks very much, Mike. Great to be with you today. And thanks, Neil, for pulling this together. And great to see you, Anne. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and the invitation. As Mike noted in the introduction, I'm a resident of downtown, so one of your neighbors. I've been downtown for about 9 years and we've raised our kids downtown. They're about to be 12-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, and they've spent 9 of their 12 years in Seattle in downtown, and it's been just a blast watching them experience downtown and grow up in a downtown like the one we have in Seattle, particularly in the times that we've been in over this last decade with so much change and growth and investment. The DSA, as Mike noted, has been around for about 60 plus years. Our mission is to create a healthy, vibrant downtown. We do that through public policy advocacy and through influence and lobbying, but also through providing direct services that are paid for by property owners downtown through the Business Improvement District that Mike noted. And so the ambassadors that you see doing cleaning and on bikes in the parks, out and about in our public areas downtown are paid for through that program. It also funds a concert series and outdoor events and marketing and promotion. And those investments and really the way that we're able to come together as the nonprofit and private sector and residential community through the organization of the MID and DSA has been really critical to the success of this downtown, where the private sector has a way to be organized and engaged with public sector leaders to really help shape this, shape a vision and shape what happens here in this place. And we're proud of our activities and achievements over the last 6 decades to really create one of the great downtowns in North America. What I wanted to do with you today is just talk a bit about the impacts over this last year on downtown Seattle from the pandemic and the economic impacts. Just speak briefly about where we are today and the level of activity that we see today on the streets or the visitor activity, office workers, et cetera. Give you just a quick snapshot of where we stand as of the 1st of June, and then look forward and speak to what we think needs to happen and what we're focused on around recovery and renewing and reimagining and restoring all that we're so used to here in our downtown previous to March of 2020. So as we all know, downtowns are all about bringing people together, and in a pandemic, we've been told for the last year plus to stay apart from one another. So the impacts, not just here, but downtowns across the country and across the world have been severe economically. And And I think the more dynamic your downtown was prior to this pandemic, the greater the contrast, frankly, has been from where we were to where we are. There's lots of downtowns that don't have great arts and culture and sports and entertainment, the stadiums and arenas and retail and food and music. And so you perhaps don't notice the impacts economically and from this pandemic like you do in a Seattle or Chicago or a New York or a San Francisco. But we're a top tier downtown, the fastest growing urban place over the last 2 decades in North America. So the impacts from this pandemic were swift and severe. And we were the first downtown in North America to really feel and experience those impacts. We didn't have any place else to look within our own country to understand sort of how quickly things would come to a screeching halt. And we really saw that on March 5th when tens of thousands of employees began working from home from companies in downtown and really across King County. That was a good thing in many ways because it saved, I think, our healthcare system and lots of lives and kept people healthy. But it was pretty devastating for restaurants and retailers and cafes and bars. Soon after, we saw dozens of conventions cancel. And to date, we've had about 77 or so conventions that have canceled over this last year. There's around 20 that have rebooked. And Visit Seattle, our great partners there that manage the convention center, are in the process of rebooking as many of those as they can. And we still have some on the books for later this year. So there may be some conventions in town later this fall and into the winter, and then 2022 as well is when we'll really see the convention business come back. Obviously, the hospitality community has really felt the brunt of the impacts. We had more than a dozen hotels that were temporarily closed this time last year. Nearly all of them have reopened. I live at Olive 8, one of the Hyatts at 8th and Olive, and our hotel has been closed all of this last year, but they will open this week, which is just great. And I think they were one of the few remaining hotels that have been closed. But hotel occupancy got down into the single digits through last summer and into the fall. As we're all familiar with living downtown, in the summer we should be at about 95% or so. So a pretty significant impact to our hotel and hospitality community. The arts and cultural community has lost about $150 million in revenue that's not going to artists and venues and all the associated jobs and vendors that are part of bringing music and musicals and plays and performance to stages and to the walls of our museums and other facilities in our downtown. So a real significant impact to the arts and cultural community. The federal aid that has been made available to workers and businesses and nonprofits certainly has been helpful, but there's many that are still struggling with their operations and to sort of see to the other side of this. We've had more than 200 ground level brick and mortar small businesses close over this last year. Those are mostly restaurants and retailers that depend on, a large downtown employee population. They depend on people coming for conventions and business meetings. And international travelers as well. And each of those segments, for the most part, have not been here over this last year. So that's resulted in a significant number of vacancies that you see in our downtown. Now, we've also had businesses that have opened up, and you sort of scratch your head of how anybody could manage to do that in a pandemic. But we've had more than 100 businesses that have opened their doors or that have signaled plans to open. And these are places that didn't exist prior to February of 2020. And you can see some of those throughout the greater downtown, which we really define as South Lake Union down through Pioneer Square and the west edge of First Hill and Capitol Hill down to the waterfront. So when I talk about downtown and some of the stats, we're really tracking and looking at that geography, really the greater downtown. So those have been the impacts. And again, you can look across the country, and I talk to my peers that run similar organizations, downtown organizations in other places. And it's been a similar story. When you start to pull out big chunks of daytime users, whether it's workers or cruise passengers or convention goers from this downtown economy, the effects are swift and severe. And that's what we've seen. And the downtown worker population really hasn't changed much since last summer. We saw a little bit of a recovery in the number of people that were showing up to their offices in June and July of last year, but it dipped a bit in the fall, and it's largely remained flat through today. We haven't seen a lot of change there. But we have seen change over the last 2-3 months in a couple other areas. And I've got just a couple of graphs that I'll share here. We're tracking a series of data points on a weekly basis. These are figures that we can get each and every week. And then there's some additional data that we're tracking that we can only get monthly or quarterly. But these are great indicators of just activity generally in downtown. And this looks at the daily presence of office workers. And I mentioned that that's been flat, and that's what this graph shows. We saw a little bit of recovery coming out of last spring, and then we dipped as we went into the third wave of coronavirus back in the winter, and we've been sort of plateaued since then. This is just going to refresh, I think, see if we'll pull these other ones up. Where we have seen some signs of life and some recovery is in average daily visitors. So these are people that don't live downtown, they don't work downtown, they're coming from somewhere outside of downtown. Now that could be Ballard or Issaquah or California, but these are folks that are coming from other places that don't work or live downtown. And we've seen a real sharp recovery really since February in the number of visitors to our downtown. And I think if you're out and about, you can sort of sense that relative to where we were 3 months ago or so. So that has been a real positive as far as just getting more customers in the streets and into restaurants and bars and the museums and other things that are open in downtown. But when you look at the total daily foot traffic, so this is folks who work downtown, live downtown, and visitors, we still are well off of where we ought to be this time of year, especially as we get closer to the summer months. Normally we'll have 400,000 plus folks downtown Monday through Friday in January, and we're still well short of that. And in April, in May, and June, we should have well north of 400,000 as we get into our warmer and nicer weather months. So it tells you just how important the downtown worker is to the downtown economy. They support so many other businesses and nonprofits and arts and cultural organizations, and really contribute to that sense of vibrancy. And we have, in a normal year, 350,000 people that are working downtown. That compares to about 84,000 of us that live downtown. And we have about 16 or so thousand hotel rooms. So you really get a sense of the scale and the importance of the downtown worker to our downtown economy and downtown vibrancy. We've been paying close attention to the Pike Place Market. It's been, one of the bright spots of activity really throughout this pandemic. And they've had to adjust and pivot in so many ways. And I think we all tip our hats to all that they've done to stay open and serve the downtown community, whether you're showing up as an essential worker or you live downtown or you're one of those visitors. They've just been a bright spot. And they also have seen an increase in foot traffic over the last several months. I-5 is just about back to normal from where it was. This measures at the north end of downtown. This measures at the south. And we're just about sort of where we normally are and where we were prior to the pandemic as far as daily traffic volumes. The tunnel under downtown, the Alaskan Way Tunnel, is still short of the baseline number of about 300,000 or so weekly trips through the tunnel, at least compared to January. So people are avoiding those tolls and taking the free trip on I-5 and as those numbers have recovered. And then the increase in visitor traffic in many ways correlates to an increase in our hotel occupancy. I mentioned that we were, in the teens and single digits for much of 2020. We got into the 20% occupancy earlier this year, and last week we were above 40% for the first time since February of 2020. So we've seen some great signs of recovery there, but we're trailing just about every other major market that we compete with across North America, except for Vancouver. So we're behind here. I think there's a number of variables that are influencing that. We've had less that's been open relative to other states and other markets. Having the border closed to Canada has impacted us. The international visitor has been really important to hotel occupancy prior to the pandemic, and obviously we're not seeing a lot of international visitors. And I do think the reputation and brand of Seattle has taken a bit of a beating over this last year, and that we know that there's some negative sentiment out there among the domestic leisure travelers, and they have choices. And I do think that has had some impact when we look at the positive and negative sentiment towards Seattle. We're not as bad as Portland or San Francisco or Minneapolis, but we have some room for improvement there. On the residential side, we've paid close attention to move-ins and move-outs in apartments in the greater downtown over this last year. For the first time in more than a decade, we saw a net move-out number of about 2,000. We've been positive net move-in for years and years and years, and at the end of 2020, we saw a net negative about 2,000 or so folks that left downtown. But as we turned the new year and into 2021, we're back into positive territory when it comes to the number of people moving in versus moving out of downtown. And we're starting to see some improvements as well in the condo market where we're also seeing increases in pending sales, not as much inventory as we had back late summer and fall of last year, and just more transactions and prices holding as well. So after some softening both in the apartment and for sale market, we're starting to see some recovery. So this information is available on our website. We're updating it regularly, so you can go here on a weekly basis and see how these numbers are changing. Our website's downtownseattle.org, and if you go under economic recovery, you can find that. So that's generally where we are today. And again, I think we all are sensing the increased foot traffic out on the streets and just seeing more people. The sunshine helps, the blue sky helps, but we know that we've got a lot of work ahead and that this isn't going to be a quick bounce back. We know we've got significant impacts to the ground floor of downtown. I mentioned those more than 200 vacancies and permanent closures. Our arts and cultural organizations were some of the first to close, and they're going to be some of the last to fully reopen. We'll start to see a few performances and shows on stages here in July, but the real comeback will start more like in September and October, where we're seeing a significant number of bookings in our music venues, and then new exhibits in museums and some of the other arts and cultural venues as well. But it's going to take them some time to rehire. Many of them still have skeleton crews, and to have the time to sort of book those shows and to develop their own productions for those venues that produce their own shows, like the Fifth Avenue or Act Theater. The Paramount and the more they're actively booking. We expect the Triple Door to open up in a couple of weeks. So some good signs within our arts and cultural community. I noted the increases recently in hotel occupancy, and we really think that Seattle can compete very well as we get into our prime time of the year here for leisure travel, for the domestic leisure traveler, those folks that are dying to get out of their own city. They want to get on a plane and go somewhere else. They've been cooped up in their own backyard or their own neighborhood or their own city for the last year, and they're not likely getting on a plane to leave the borders of the U.S. They're going to go to another city within the U.S., and we think Seattle can continue to compete for leisure travel and compete very well. We've had a really strong run over the last several years in attracting leisure travelers, and we think that's a key part of recovery, is getting lots of them back here, spending money in our restaurants, in our hotels, going to the art museums, et cetera. The downtown office workers, another real key segment. We conducted a return to work survey of major employers, of about 300 plus employers in downtown a couple of weeks ago. And some of the key findings there were, one, that 2/3 or so of respondents, actually closer to 70%, are still believing that the office is going to play a central role in their work culture and how they operate. A very small number say they're going to continue to work remotely and be fully remote, in the single digits as far as the percent of employers that are telling us that. So most believe that they're going to have an office-centric model. Now, some say that they're going to continue to allow some flexibility and a certain number of days a week that will be remote. So I do think there will be a recalibration here in the office and the role of the office, but by no means is it going away. It's still going to be really important to company culture and to downtowns. We asked employers when they were planning to bring folks back. We see a first wave at the end of June and early July. And then a next wave really that week after Labor Day. We think those are going to be two sort of key periods for folks returning to the office. Now, our survey was fielded before the governor's reopening announcement of a June 30th date. So we think that in some ways is going to accelerate the planning that companies are doing because there's a real firm marker in the ground now and a real clear date for when the state will be fully reopened. So if you were a company that was sort of maybe kicking the can down the road on making those decisions or doing that planning, I think in many ways the governor's announcement maybe spurred you into action. So our survey came before that announcement. So those data points don't fully reflect sort of what we anticipate at the end of this month and potentially sooner if we hit certain vaccine milestones. But we do anticipate a number of folks coming back to the office really beginning end of this month. That's our plan as an organization. We've been having our senior team and HR and our chief operating officer and folks who supervise those ambassadors that work outside in our offices majority of the week since early August, and we'll be bringing everybody back on June 30th. And know that a number of companies will be ahead of that deadline, but we think most will be looking early July and September. So the leisure traveler, the office worker, and then the regional resident, the resident of Ballard or the resident of Issaquah that hasn't been downtown in more than a year. We think those are the three key segments to sort of the initial phases of downtown recovery. Getting those folks back on the streets, in the shops, in the restaurants, in the hotel beds is going to be really key. Those are the three groups that we're focused on as an organization. The international traveler, the folks coming to go to a convention, and the business traveler, those are groups that are more likely to be coming at the end of this year or really in 2022. So we want to be focused on the office worker, the domestic leisure traveler, and then those folks that live within our 4-county region here that loved coming downtown before, that maybe are bored with takeout in their own neighborhood. They want to get out of their backyard. They want to get reacquainted with those great downtown experiences that they loved before the pandemic. And so we're going to be focused on those three groups and drawing them in and making sure they have a great experience when they come. Now, this pandemic, I think, has changed a lot of things in how we live and how we get around and how we interact with one another really across the globe. But when I think of cities, I think there's a couple of things that are still true and that this pandemic really hasn't changed. And we really believe that the fundamental behaviors and preferences that people had to and wanting to be in cities prior to this pandemic really haven't changed. I mean, cities were going through a multi-decade renaissance across this country and across the world. The market wanted to be in cities, in walkable places. And we don't see any evidence that has changed. People want dynamic, safe, welcoming, interesting, vibrant places where they have lots of access and proximity to fun things to do and experiences they can't get anywhere else. We don't think that's changed. And the things that are required to draw those folks in, we don't think those have changed much either. Cities have always had to be safe and welcoming and healthy. People have needed to have those needs met first before they're going to take part in anything else. That's been true throughout the history of cities. And when you don't get those right, you don't succeed as a city. So the basics of what it takes to draw people in and ensure they have a great experience, we don't think those things have changed much either. As we look toward recovery, we think we need to be really leveraging our unique assets here in downtown Seattle. The things that you can't get from behind a computer screen or in your own neighborhood, things like our arts and cultural opportunities, entertainment and sports, those one-of-a-kind experiences like the Pike Place Market, like Climate Pledge Arena, which will be open here this fall. These are experiences that you can't get anywhere else. They're going to be key to recovery, and we're going to do everything we can to really promote and leverage that. We see that as a key part of recovery, in addition to focusing on the basics that I mentioned. And then I think the experience in our downtown, whether you're running a hotel or a park or a retail shop or a restaurant, those experiences, I think, have to be even better than they were before. I think the expectation of the market, whether you're coming to visit, you're coming to put on a meeting or an event, the bar has now been elevated even higher, I believe. And so all of us as operators and promoters and producers of things in downtown, I think have to take our game to the next level. I think the downtowns that do that are going to be the ones that are most successful coming out of this. People expect a unique and delightful and exciting experience when they come to a downtown, and we've got to deliver that. And then I think our downtown must be more inclusive and equitable too on the other side of this pandemic. It's really got to reflect the region and the diversity of our region. It's really got to serve as everybody's neighborhood. And when you come here, I think you need to see and feel that you belong, no matter where you're coming from. If you're coming from Ballard or you're coming from Southeast Seattle or Kent or the East Side, this downtown really has to reflect the full region and our diversity of who we are from a racial and economic and other perspectives. And I think, again, the downtowns that do that well are going to be the most dynamic and durable, and I think interesting and desirable on the other side of this pandemic. So broadly, those are sort of the four sort of core principles around our thinking for recovery, that the basics still matter because the fundamentals haven't changed much. And we've got to stay focused on those basics. We have some unique assets that other places don't have that you can only do in downtown. We have to leverage those assets. Those are going to be key to our recovery. We've got to focus on the experience and really promoting, highlighting, curating those experiences that you can't get online and you can't get anywhere else. And we've got to focus on inclusivity and equitable recovery. Our action plan in order to achieve those broad objectives is really focused on four specific priorities. Ensuring downtown safe and welcoming, clean and beautiful, producing outdoor events and activations to draw people back to downtown and create more life on the street and give people from Issaquah and Ballard and these other places a reason to come downtown if they don't work here, or if they do work here, a reason to stay after work and enjoy an event or music or a concert. And then fourth, marketing and promoting and communicating about what is reopened, our focus on recovery, the reasons to come, and working to rehabilitate our brand, which has been beat up a bit over this last year through negative headlines, negative stories, some bad decision-making and governance by city government, and some unforced errors on their part that have made our challenge in getting through this and back on our feet that much more difficult. We're investing $3.3 million as an organization in those four key areas. There's some very specific actions under those four priorities of safe and welcoming, where we'll be hiring additional off-duty police patrols that are on bike and foot. Clean and beautiful, we're expanding our own cleaning operation, hiring more ambassadors, increasing our utilization of equipment, trikes that can get to messes faster, bringing in some contracted services to get after graffiti in some of the entrances and gateways to downtown that look a bit rough and ragged right now. So a big investment in additional cleaning services, as well as beautification. We're going to be investing in additional murals and lighting and art just to get the place looking a little sharper and more delightful than it has over the last couple of months. We've made some progress on that front over the last 3 months, but we still have a ways to go. It looks better than it did back in January, February, but we've got room for improvement there. So we're focusing a significant amount of investment on making sure downtown's clean and beautiful. The third area, again, around outdoor events. We think this is going to be key to sort of the initial phase of recovery. I noted earlier that our arts and cultural organizations are going to, it's going to take them some time before they can get their stages full. So in July and August and September, we want to ensure that there's lots of things happening throughout downtown in our parks, our plazas, down on Pier 62, the great first phase of the waterfront project that opened back last September. We want to see that pier full of concerts and food trucks and games and reasons for you to come downtown. So we're expanding our Downtown Summer Sounds concert series an extra month. We're adding to the programming that we produce in Westlake, Occidental, and Bell Street parks. And we're looking to partner with other event producers, other organizations to help finance and fund their own ideas of outdoor festivals, events, and markets. So look for more outdoor events this summer than what we've been able to do in previous summers. We think that's a real key part of recovery and just getting more people downtown and providing reasons for residents to come out and enjoy an evening or a weekend downtown as well. And then the fourth area around a major region-wide, really focusing on the Puget Sound region and those visitors to downtown, again, that maybe haven't been down for a year, but also office workers as well. We'll be investing in a wide-scale marketing communications effort and have brought in Copacino Fujikata, one of the great Seattle branding and marketing agencies, to lead that. That'll hit the market really in early July. You'll begin to see the communications and paid media around that, really telling the story of what's open, what's new, driving traffic to the outdoor events and concerts and music and other things going on that we and other organizations are producing, helping to provide some marketing muscle for those arts and cultural organizations that don't have the same level of budget that they once did to promote their own events and things that they'll be producing and later in the fall, and rehabilitating downtown's brand a bit, putting out our own story and narrative and positive imagery around what is open, what is available, and those positive experiences that you can take part in downtown. So that's where we're focused. Where we need the most help from our city and county government is around the issue of chronic homelessness and safety in downtown. And this was a challenge coming into this pandemic. The pandemic in many ways made it worse because it shut down, in many respects, our criminal justice system that was no longer booking individuals that were arrested by the police department to reduce the population of the jail to avoid the spread of COVID. There weren't as many trials being held by judges with juries and prosecutors and defense attorneys. Our police department has gone through significant staffing issues that have been well reported. So our criminal justice system and criminal legal system has been deeply impacted and in some ways not functioning as it has been designed. Our congregate homeless shelters were, the populations of those were reduced way back in March of 2020 to prevent the spread of COVID. There wasn't enough additional investment in other locations, and our government did not act with the great enough sense of urgency. And we really utilized our streets and parks to house people over this past year. And we continue to utilize our streets and parks to house people. There's too many people outside today, and we need to do everything we can and act with a greater sense of urgency as a city, as a county, as a community to bring people inside. In many ways, this reality led us to work with a number of other organizations to develop and write and file an amendment to the city charter. And I know that you heard from former Mayor Tim Burgess and former council member Tim Burgess on that recently and on the details of that. So I won't go into a lot of detail there, but suffices to say that is a necessary action. I urge everybody to sign the petitions, which are out on the street today or can be downloaded from compassionseattle.org and then submitted. We have till the end of this month to submit 33,000 signatures to get that qualified for the November ballot and compel a different approach to addressing homelessness in the city of Seattle. More investment in temporary housing, emergency housing, and more investment in treatment so we can bring people inside. That in many ways is sort of the medium and long game when it comes to the crisis of homelessness downtown and across our city. We need a near-term and short-term action plan as well to bring people off the sidewalks, out of the alleys and out of the parks. And that's our message to city and county government is invest right now because folks are coming back. They're trying to reopen their doors. We're working to welcome office workers back. We want to put on events and activations. And most importantly, it's inhumane to have people suffering out on the streets. And that's been our message to city and county leaders. We have seen some investment and some action by county government and County Executive Constantine, an investment in several hundred beds that will be available to folks that are on the streets in downtown, as well as investment in behavioral health services and a new behavioral health crisis center and service that will be located down at 4th and Jefferson in downtown Seattle in one of the county's building. We're looking for a similar, specific, urgent, focused plan by city government as well, and are engaged in a series of conversations with both the mayor's office, city staff, and the city council, urging action. And we can use your help there, and advocating and asking and demanding investment and a plan for safety and homelessness downtown so we can bring folks inside. That's the message I would urge you to deliver as residents of downtown to city council members, to city staff, to city government generally, to the mayor's office, and to the county as well. There are great impacts from the encampments that we have throughout our downtown today, whether it's at City Hall Park at the south end of downtown, or the one at 3rd and Pike today, where we have 20 tents sitting in front of Wild Ginger and the Triple Door, which is working to reopen in 2 weeks and bring shows back in July and create jobs for folks and tax revenue and get their doors and operations going again. We need a solution and a greater sense of urgency from our city leaders around the situation that sits in front of that great venue and restaurant today, so that they can reopen and the folks that are in those tents suffering have a better place to be than at 3rd and Pike and on the sidewalk. And that ought to be the central focus of our city government. If folks ask me what's the most important thing that the city can do around downtown recovery, it's that. Because if we don't get that right, everything else we're doing in many ways will be for naught. We will be slow to recover as a city. Our hotel occupancy will continue to trail other cities. Office workers will be leery to come back. International travelers will choose other places for their vacation. Meeting planners have other options of where they want to hold conventions. And I think we all have to recognize that we're competing with every other city and every other downtown that has been deeply impacted economically by this pandemic to recover. They're trying to attract the same folks we are. And everybody today across our country and across the world really has more choice than they ever have before, and they have more access to information than they ever have before. So there's no secrets anymore about things you're doing well or the challenges you have. And there's lots that's going well in Seattle right now. We have incredible assets that other cities would just die for. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, frankly, as we look to rebuild, given the assets that we have here in downtown. But we can take nothing for granted. And we have to approach this crisis on our streets with the same level of urgency and focus and determination that we approached this last year in fighting this pandemic. Let's take the same model and recipe, which is accepting the reality of the crisis that it's at hand, acknowledging that we've got to work together, tracking our progress, so we know if we have to adjust course or adjust strategy. You can go on any dashboard from King County Public Health or the Department of Public Health at the state level today, know exactly where we stand with the number of cases, the number of folks that have been vaccinated. We should have that same information when it comes to this homelessness crisis, to know whether we're making progress around the investments and strategies that we're deploying and whether we need to change course. So we need to apply the same approach and move with a greater sense of urgency. It's been 6 years since we've declared this a state of emergency here in King County and Seattle, and we need to act like it's one. So those are the issues that we're focused on. Those are the things that we're leaning on and asking and demanding action on from city and county government, and where we as a downtown community, I think, need to come together with a real clear message around safety, around helping those that are on the streets today that are dealing with substance use and mental health issues that really in many ways contribute to the safety issues that we have. I think if we solve for the folks that are sleeping on our streets that are dealing with those conditions, we solve for a lot of the other safety issues. We solve for a lot of the shoplifting. We solve for a lot of the assaults that are taking place when we get folks that are in desperate situations in a much better place than the corner of 3rd and Pike or an alley or a park downtown. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and I really welcome the opportunity to take questions and engage in more of a conversation on anything I covered or anything I missed. So thanks again.
Well, Jon, if you're not running for mayor, you should, and I would be the first to endorse I think your grasp of the city, the issues, the challenges, the opportunities are it's encouraging. Would you repeat again the petition that is available to sign and what that will do so that we can all go online or find that person on the street to sign that petition?
Yeah, Charter Amendment 29 is an amendment to our city's charter. And if 33,060 registered voters in Seattle sign the petition to put it on the ballot in November, all of us as voters in Seattle will have an opportunity to vote for it. And it would require city government to, within 1 year, invest and bring on 2,000 units of emergency housing, plus the treatment and other services that are necessary to bring folks inside and support them and stabilize them and keep them inside. And really compels the city around a very specific and detailed plan that's outlined in that amendment in the petition itself around chronic homelessness. And it's modeled off of best practices from cities around our country, and specifically an organization that works with cities that's based out of Washington, D.C., Community Solutions. You can go to their website, communitysolutions.org, and learn more about their work. So we've modeled that petition off of the best practices, and it requires investment in treatment, emergency temporary housing. And then as those services and housing are made available, the city's required to clean and keep open parks and other public spaces. So that is the key approach and key sort of piece of this. It's not about chasing people from one location to the other, which really hasn't worked. It's just moved people from one park to the next. This is about bringing people inside and doing what is necessary to bring people inside, get them connected to temporary emergency housing, but also get connected to permanent housing as well.
And John, where can we find that petition?
If you go to compassionseattle.org, you can download it and sign it yourself. You can have your neighbors and friends and colleagues sign that same sheet. I think there's 10 signature blocks per petition page. And then you can mail it in. There's instructions on the website, or you can bring it to the office here in downtown, the campaign office, which is at the corner of 7th and Olive. And then there's signature gatherers throughout the city as well. So you may run into one of those that are out at grocery stores and parks and other locations, and if you can sign in person.
Great. And I'm sure others have questions too, but I'm just curious that, what you're describing is certainly not unknown to our mayor, not unknown to our city council. This is not something that is a surprise to anyone. What is the reason you think that the city government is not taking action? Is this a case of clay feet? Is this a case of not having a budget? Is this not having a strategy? We certainly can and would like to do everything we can to inspire action. But what's the log jam here?
Well, we've lacked a plan. You can scour City Hall and you won't find a plan around chronic homelessness. So we've invested in programs. We've done some good things. It's been a piecemeal approach. And we've watched all along the way, politicians and elected officials argue with one another and reach moments of utter dysfunction. And I think it's time for voters to have a say, to say, this is the plan and the approach that we want you to implement. And that's what this charter amendment gives voters the opportunity to do, to send a real clear message and a mandate to City Hall around an approach that we know works, that brings people inside, that helps reopen our parks and public spaces. It's certainly not because we haven't spent a lot of money, because today we're spending more money than we ever have, and we have more people outside. So I don't know who can defend the current approach or the status quo, because it hasn't helped our neighborhoods, it hasn't helped our park system, and it hasn't helped the 4,000 people living unsheltered in Seattle today.
Well, that's an important distinction about the petition is a vehicle for us to influence change with a plan that comes from the people of the city. And in the absence of a plan from our council or the mayor, that seems like a good idea. We certainly can do our letter writing campaign to inspire the city government to get off the dime and do certain things. But it sounds like a real way to get some progress is to make sure we're a part of that petition so that there is a plan and not a continued debate about various plans.
Absolutely. And I do note a question here in the chat around the balance between temporary housing versus permanent supportive housing. And absolutely, we need to continue to invest in permanent supportive housing and permanent housing generally within our city, more low income and affordable housing. And we're making record investments there through the housing levy and through other related programs. But we've really lacked a strategy to deal with the crisis as it confronts us today, which is thousands of people that are outside. And the pace at which we're building permanent supportive housing is not sufficient to bring them inside anytime soon. And I just don't think we can tell the folks at Third and Pike or at Ballard Commons that they have to wait 3 or 4 or 5 more years for those units to be done while we execute on that plan. Just like we invested and put a lot of focus on development of a vaccine to beat this pandemic, while at the same time social distancing, wearing masks, washing our hands, doing all the other things to mitigate the spread of coronavirus, we need to take a similar sort of dual approach when it comes to homelessness. And we haven't done enough around treatment, which our city does not fund, drug, alcohol, and mental health treatment, and cheaper, faster housing that can be stood up within a matter of weeks or months, not years. That's better, safer, healthier than the streets and the sidewalks and the alleys.
Yep, good point. Risa, do you see if we have some questions?
The only question I saw was from Peter Shapiro, and I allowed him to speak. So, Peter, if you have another question, you can ask. Anybody that is watching from their apartment may email me, and I can read that question for you. Or if you're on this webinar, you can also ask to speak or put something in the chat or raise your hand.
Risa, thank you. This is Peter. Hi, John.
Hello, Peter.
I'm a resident, longtime activist in working on behalf of homeless people and for low-income housing. And I know and I congratulate you and thank you for your service on the board of the Downtown Emergency Service Center, which is the pioneer in this world, really, certainly in this country, of permanent supportive housing. So you know it works. You know that it saves money. It's more expensive to keep people homeless than it is to house them. But I agree, it's a long-term solution. But unless we start to gather those hundreds of millions, I calculated about $1.5 billion readily available from our private sector on top of the public sector, housing trust fund, levy, and so on. We can get it done in 5 or 10 years, while we're also working on the more temporary solutions, which I don't oppose, but there needs to be an equal vigor to create the ability to have permanent supportive housing for the 3,000 to 5,000 people now who experience that awful situation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we can't house people in tiny homes for forever. That needs to be a way station and a place where we can get people inside, stabilize them, provide counseling and treatment services, and then move quickly to place them in a more permanent solution, whether that's fully permanent supportive housing, or it could be some place within, in the market that is permanently affordable, but doesn't have all those associated services because that individual may not need them. They may be able to get back into the employment market and earning a paycheck. We hire hundreds of people over the course of a year out of homelessness to help support our ambassador and cleaning services. And that's in many ways their story of getting stabilized, getting a place inside, and then earning a paycheck and having a 401k and benefits and getting their life back in order. And they don't require a permanent supportive housing unit, but there's many folks that do that aren't, employable. So I think this is a both and strategy. We've missed the emergency and crisis level response on the housing front as we've been expanding our permanent supportive housing investments. And I think in many ways, that's why we see so many people outside today.
John, we have a question from Neil, and then we'll take one from Jean, and then we'll take one from Ann.
Great. I'll try to be briefer in my responses.
Okay. Yeah, John, you talked about the crime in the streets and that concern of people, and I think that's certainly a concern here of folks. We heard from many of them and from other people I know across town. So what can be done? What can we do to support that effort? what can we do to help? It's been talked about for a number of years, but nothing's happening, or at least it's not easy to see what is happening that's different. So what can we do? Is that one of these things we add to the letters, or is there things beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, so much of this was dysfunctional prior to the pandemic, and we as an organization have put out lots of reports over the last 2 years that have highlighted sort of the dysfunction in our system, and lots of people that are cycling through the criminal justice system, Harbor View, the ERs, and other places, not getting the help they need, and at the same time hurting other people and committing a fair amount of property crime. So we went into this as a city with a lot of dysfunction and ineffectiveness. It's specific to engaging and dealing with a relatively small number of people that were creating a lot of the havoc. And we still haven't quite sorted out as a city and a county and with the system of how we appropriately intervene with those folks. Now, I'm not suggesting they all need to be put away forever and throw away the key. That's not a strategy that's humane or has really worked in the past. But we need to be ensuring that there's some amount of accountability and that they're getting the services, and if it's housing, the housing they need as well. Because many of them are harming and hurting other people, and our city and county have essentially sort of shifted the entire problem outside the halls of the criminal justice system onto the streets of our city and into the businesses. And so we've attempted to reduce harm to people by not locking them up. All we've done is transferred the harm to Bartell Drugs and people who live downtown and people who work downtown, our ambassadors that are working to keep this place great. 15 of them have gotten assaulted since August. That ranges from stabbings to guns drawn to being punched. So I think our message to the county, which has a big role to play here too, the county prosecutor's office, the judges, the jail, and the county that funds treatment services, and the city is the status quo is not acceptable to us. You all need to work together specific to this population in developing the set of investments and programs to more properly intervene to keep our neighborhood safe and welcoming, and to hold folks accountable and provide them the services they need. Now, getting the jail reopened and hearings going again and all of that is a big first step. And so I think that's an initial message to bring of let's bring the criminal legal system back to full operation here. We're opening everything else. It's time to reopen that too. There was an individual that killed somebody's dog and assaulted them in Pioneer Square a few days ago. And the prosecutor requested bail. And that they be held. The police department did as well, and the judge let him go because the capacity in the jail is limited, and they didn't think they wanted to give that person the spot in case somebody else who was worse off came along. Like we can't continue to go on like this. So I would bring that message forward to county leadership as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jean, you can ask your question.
This is Jean Durning. I don't know whether I'm being videoed or not. I agree that you have laid out the challenges of homelessness and insecure housing in this city very well, and it's an enormous problem, and we really appreciate the efforts that have gone into trying to address it. But I'm concerned about using a sledgehammer when you need a scalpel, in using a charter amendment for something that is specifically a city function that should be happening under existing government. Or if you want to change government, do it in order to change the shape of the government itself, rather than doing what is, it seems to me, in effect, legislation. And I wonder if, I feel as though we need to have the opponent of charter as the system in an equal position speaking to you. And I am not that kind of advocate, but I'm really concerned, deeply concerned about using a charter for something that seems to me a legislative function.
Oh, thanks, Jean. I'll be real brief. And that has been a critique that's been raised around this measure. And I just frankly disagree. I think, our city charter sets broad policy and procedures and the structure for city government. I think it's entirely appropriate that voters have an opportunity to set that broad policy and the approach they want to see to addressing this crisis on the streets. And the preamble of our city charter states that the initial purpose of our city government is to ensure the general health and welfare of our community and all the citizens. And I think the city's inability to effectively deal with this issue completely threatens that. So I don't think there's a better place than our city charter to really set a clear approach that voters have the opportunity to either approve or reject. And it's up to them whether they want their charter, the charter of the people, to reflect this approach or not. And if enough folks sign, they'll have an opportunity to make that decision.
Anne, you had your hand raised?
Yes, I did want to comment on one thing. My thanks to you too for joining us today and giving us this rundown on what's happening in your association, which is terribly important to all of us. But as someone who chose to live at Horizon House because it is downtown and because I wanted to be downtown and I am downtown and I have been for the past 11 years, I just want to comment on on the degradation of the community's response to some of the social inequities that have driven so much of the dysfunction that we've seen here and down in Seattle, and has affected our reputation and has affected the willingness of people to be here and damage their expectation that their experience will be as we would like it to be. And I know it's not the business of the association necessarily to get involved in this level of change, but I'm just wondering, do you have a position or is the association engaged at all in a discussion of where we go on those issues?
Are you speaking to issues of income inequality and those types of things, Anne?
Not so much income inequality, because I don't think that's the issue. I think it's what do we do about people who genuinely wish to participate in a process that's called, unfortunately, protesting, although much of it is protesting, but which gets totally sideways with what is intended because of all kinds of reasons, the way we react to that kind of behavior.
Yeah, it's been incredibly frustrating. I've spoken out quite a bit over this last year around the small number of people that take over peaceful protests or come down on their own with really no agenda, no contribution to our democratic process or to the discussion of public policy, but they come down to break things or hurt other people. And I just think that has no place in our city. I think our city leaders have been way too slow and to respond, and their response has been meek. And they've sent the silence, I think, has said a lot. There's very little accountability. So the small groups of folks that have come down to do that know that they can come back in many cases and repeat the same behavior and face no consequences. And I think it's a big headwind to recovery. And the folks who get harmed in that are small business owners, the folks that are working there, the folks they're trying to hire to reopen, the folks that own property and have had to replace their windows multiple times or can't get insurance policies. So those are real issues. And I think it sends a signal to others that are thinking of coming as a customer or coming back to work. It sort of raises questions in their minds of, do I want to get mixed up in that at 6 o'clock on my way from my office to the bus or the parking garage or to the art museum? So thankfully, it's been somewhat quieter over the last couple of months, but I don't think that's because our city government has taken any better of an approach or action. It's just, I think we've lucked out.
John, I see we have a couple questions in our chat. One was, I've noticed that the cleaner streets on my walks downtown recently and appreciate them very much. She talked with the gentleman who was sweeping the sidewalk, and he said the businesses are paying for those services. Why isn't the city paying for that?
Well, in most downtowns across the country, you do have a model like you have in Seattle, where the private sector, either businesses or in our case, property owners, have organized themselves through a business improvement district. We call it the MID here, the Metropolitan Improvement District, to supplement city services, to say we're going to invest above and beyond kind of the baseline services and the foundational services. And we get to decide how they're run and sort of how we want those dollars spent. And we're going to operate it through a nonprofit. That's the model we have here. And we've had it since 1999 through the MID. Now, the key part of that is to supplement, not replace or supplant the baseline foundational services. And I think in many respects, we're either there or at risk of supplanting those services. Our teams are picking up a lot of garbage and doing a lot of cleaning around tent encampments downtown because our city doesn't have an effective response to help people get inside. We took 2,000 pounds of trash off of 3rd and Stewart after an encampment was cleared there a couple of months ago. So we're all in favor of the model and the idea of supplemental. When it becomes supplantation and replacement, I think the model breaks down. And that's been our message to city government. I think our city needs to be doing more around sort of the core functions of municipal government here.
Thank you. The other question in the chat was, isn't there a role for the state of Washington since so many unhoused people are camped on West Dot right of ways? What's the state's role?
Yeah, I do think they have a role certainly in better maintenance of the freeway itself, particularly the stretch, from the University District down to the International District, which there's no nice way to put it. It doesn't look great. And I know you all have a pretty good view of that. They lack a lot of the expertise to be engaging people in encampments and people living outside. That's not sort of core to their line of work. But I do think a stronger coordination with the city so that the city and the county and agencies that have those capabilities and expertise can be doing the work with folks that are outside in tents along the freeway and in state right of way. But we're advocating and in partnership with the city that the state at least increase its maintenance and cleaning of the facility. It's in many ways sort of the front porch of our city and downtown, and it don't look great right now, and it ought to look better. So that's one of the priorities when I mentioned our high level priority around clean and beautiful. One of the focus areas is around the freeway itself and urging WashDOT to increase their cleaning. Now, to their credit, they do come by and they spray over the graffiti, and it's not too long before it gets hit again, but we need to stay on top of it better than we have been.
Mike, Neil, I don't see any more questions in the chat, and I have received no more emails.
Yeah. Thank you, Risa. Okay. Mike, you have any final wrap-up comments there?
Sure. Well, John, thank you so much for giving us a really thorough and descriptive understanding of what's taking place, where we've been, where we are, where we need to go. And I think that it gives us a little bit of information to be able to kind of craft some language to city officials, maybe state officials, maybe county officials, to try to inspire action. And be a part of a pile-on to I'm sure the many messages that those entities are getting about getting off the dime and doing something. So hopefully, we can be inspiring to make something happen here. It certainly isn't just all us, but I think that as you're talking with people like us, every group of residents and multiple communities adds up to a lot of people, and we'll certainly do everything we can to give our point of view to our government leaders.
Well, thanks, Mike. And I really appreciate the invitation and all of your advocacy and action. And I do believe that democracy still works. So let's all keep raising our voices and staying engaged. The best ideas will come through, and our downtown will come through this, I think, even stronger. I think if we can get these set of challenges right and get focused on addressing them, that our best days as a city are really, and a downtown are ahead of us. So thanks again for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And thank you, Neil, for helping to arrange it. And hopefully we've got great viewership either during or following the actual presentation so that everyone can be inspired to help act.
Mike, let me ask this ad. We're going to have a rerun of this next Tuesday at 4:00. We're going to rerun on HHTV. So thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you all.
Right.
Take care. Be well.